In this video, I'll show you how I achieved this result. With every project, I try to explore something new, and I realized I never created a good underwater render. So I went to ArtStation, searched for underwater scene, and kept scrolling until I came across this concept art by Paweł Letkowski. You can find the link to his page in the description. The balance between warm and cool colors, even underwater, gives the scene a magical, almost alien feel. Now it's time to break down the work. The fluorescent mushrooms, the true stars of the scene, then we have the surrounding vegetation, and then the ocean and the seafloor. To help us with all this, we use the second slide of the concept, which explains how the scene should be composed using real-life references. To model the mushrooms, we'll start with this image, as it includes their silhouettes. First, we add a cylinder, aligned it with the y-axis, and then extrude it several times until we achieve the desired shape. To adjust the position of certain vertices, I use the G key with proportional editing enabled. Once the shape looked right, I applied the subdivision modifier and began the sculpting phase. When sculpting organic objects, there's no need to be precise or symmetrical. In fact, the more uneven you are, the more realistic the result will look. Remember to create backup copies when working across multiple stages like modeling and sculpting. As you can see in the concept, the mushrooms are surrounded by roots. The quickest way to create them is using a geometry node system. I used this setup, which you can copy, and I found it through this video. Essentially, you set the start and end vertices for the roots. I needed multiple endpoints, so I connected the start vertices to the group input. This allowed me to create a vertex group and select it in the modifier menu. With these nodes, you can adjust the curve resolution and radius, and using the noise texture, you can control the pattern. I decided to repeat the geometry node system 3 times at different heights to create 3 layers of roots. Once finished, I applied the geometry nodes and used the simple deform modifier to twist the roots. Now it's time to apply materials to our mushroom. Instead of creating everything from scratch, I used materials from a mushroom collection I found on Quixel Bridge. To do this, first you unwrap the mesh, then adjust the islands to fit the material like this. To add fluorescence, we can use the subsurface scattering. Start by creating a new image texture, making sure it's selected, and then go to Texture Paint and paint the parts you want to glow. The final image will act as a mask for the subsurface scattering. Finally, apply a simple material to the roots, and it's ready. For the shells, I simply modeled and distributed a couple of them with a hair system, painting the areas where I wanted them to be. Now I just repeated the same process for the other 3 mushrooms, and here's the result. For the vegetation on the seafloor, I decided to use 4 different plant collections. The first 2 came directly for Quixel Bridge, which I imported into Blender using the launcher. The third collection consists of 3 subdivided planes with an inverted glass plate texture applied to them. The fourth collection includes the kelp. To achieve the most realistic result possible, I used the geometry node system. First, I imported a kelp leaf texture, then started building the geometry node system. I created a curve and added thickness with these nodes, then set up a system to distribute the leaves using the instances on points node. After resampling the curve, I then aligned and rotated the leaves as needed. After adding and adjusting the material for the curve and the leaves, I animated the kelp using a wave modifier. Feel free to copy this geometry node system if you'd like to use it in your own projects. Since I didn't have much experience with underwater environments, I started by looking up tips online, and I found this tutorial incredibly helpful. If you want a detailed explanation, definitely check it out. What I did was create a plane, add an ocean modifier, adjust some settings and add a simple material. For the seafloor, I created a UV sphere, split it in half and placed it below sea level. I gave it a very dark blue material to simulate the darkness of the depths and reduce the IOR level of the specular. To add volume to the water, I created a cube, scaled it to fill the entire scene, and assigned it a principal volume material. I increased the anisotropy to let sunlight pass through better, and adjusted the black body intensity to create a sense of depth in the water. To generate fake caustics, I used this node system attached to the light output of a spotlight. Credits for this setup go to this video. Check it out. Now it's time to shape the terrain. First, I created a plane, subdivided several times and roughly shaped it with sculpting. Then, I imported the previously modeled mushrooms and placed them as close as possible to the original concept. Inside the principal volume, the subsurface effect tends to fade, so I had to increase its strength and use the emission node to help. I then assigned the basic PBR material to the terrain and scattered the 4 plant collections after importing them into the scene and using a hair particle system. For the kelp, I took advantage of drawing curves freely, creating various shapes and positioning them optimally. After that, I spent some time adjusting the lights and colors of the scene, duplicating some mushrooms in the background to enhance the sense of depth, and positioning the camera with 2 simple keyframes. To add more movement and life to the scene, I decided to include some fish swimming around. I found these 2 pre-animated models on Fab and imported them into a new Blender file. After adjusting the materials and duplicating some of them to create a school of fish, I added them to the scene. To make the fish move from one point to another, I simply added 2 location keyframes to their existing animation. For the plants, I used the same approach as with the kelp leaves by adding a wave modifier and tweaking the settings. And finally, the scene is ready to be rendered.